The following program will make you want to grow things and experience new and wonderful dreams about your plants, garden, and garden design. Listener participation is always strongly advised. Good evening and welcome to Down the Garden Path with your hosts, Joanne Shaw and Matthew Dressing, right here on Reality Radio 101. To contact us live this evening, emails only. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. And now, right to your hosts of Down the Garden Path, Joanne Shaw and Matthew Dressing.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Down the Garden Path, where we discuss down-to-earth tips and advice for your plants, gardens, and landscapes. As landscape designers and gardeners, we both think it is important and possible to have a great garden and that is low maintenance, and we want to help you make it happen every episode that we're here. I'm Joanne Shaw, landscape designer and owner of Down to Earth Landscape Design for the past 11 years. It is currently a design-only business here east of the GTA. With me is Matthew Dressing.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. I am Matthew Dressing, horticulturist and landscape designer and owner of Natural Affinity Designs. Natural Affinity is a landscape design and garden maintenance firm servicing Toronto and the eastern GTA. We enjoy doing Down the Garden Path each week, bringing you interesting, relevant, and helpful topics to help you achieve a great garden. We learn right along with you, from each other, from our research, or from the guests that join us here on the show. We welcome your questions via social media and emails.
Excellent. And part of our show is always about growing, aren't we? We're talking about growing a lot. And so I'm really excited to talk about this topic. We have Bob Reeves joining us, and he's president and founder of Root Rescue Environmental Products. Bob's passion is his conviction that soil health equals plant health. He began the Root Rescue Project in 2005 with a discovery he made at his family's nursery and garden center, Reeves Florist and Nursery in Woodbridge, Ontario. He's worn many hats over the years: grower, nursery buyer, IT manager, and landscape designer and estimator for his own design-build company, Revisions Designs. Bob was also the original developer of the widely used landscape design and quotation software suite, Dynascape, which both Matthew and I use. At the center of his career has been the pursuit of his twin loves, landscape plants and industry innovation. He advocates strongly for a holistic approach to growing and sustaining the landscapes we all work with. The secret to plant success and ultimately our success is hiding under our feet. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So we're looking forward to our lessons today. I feel like it's going to be a bit of a science lesson, but growing, like we said in the opening, that's all where it starts, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the whole experience for me when I discovered how important soil health was. It was a real revelation, and it was a real turning point in the way I thought of growing plants. I mean, by then I had been pretty much steeped in the traditions of chemistry and fertilizers and everything else. And this has been a great discovery for me, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And I love talking about it now that I've discovered it. So you're going to have trouble shutting me up, actually.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Did you want to start off and tell us, how did Root Rescue come to be?
Yeah, well, it was actually your introduction kind of hinted at it, but we have had a business in Woodbridge that ran from 1923 till
Wow.
2010. It closed in 2010. But my department in that business was the Nursery Live Goods Landscape Design Build Department. And it was a pretty big going concern. We were selling an awful lot of plant material to the local clientele in Vaughan and around. And that was good and bad. Vaughan and Woodbridge and that whole area had been a growth area for so long. We didn't want for customers. We were right in the middle of it, which was the good part of being a plant seller.
Mm-hmm.
But more and more, the bad part of being a plant seller into that area was how difficult some plants found it when they arrived in the client's backyard. The success rates were not as high as they needed to be. So I struggled for years trying to figure out exactly how I could reduce returns and refunds, dead plants. I've sold you a beautiful $500 Japanese maple that I personally nurtured for years before it even got brought to the market, and I'm crossing my fingers and hoping I don't see it come back.
Oh, yeah.
And in those subdivisions and developments around where we were, there was a real risk that plants would not succeed. And this was despite the fact that we were using bone meal and advocating peat moss and additions to soil and all those things. We were still seeing too many plants come back dead, way too many, and numbers that I just wouldn't accept. So I began looking for alternative answers to the chemistry set, and that's really what took me into the wonderful world of soil microbes and soil health as something that I needed to look at. And it turned out that those deeply disturbed soils that are left behind after the builder leaves don't have much life in them at all. And life that I didn't know was really important, in fact, to plant success. And I'm speaking here of microbial life, very small critters from bacteria on up and critically fungi were missing or really wrecked in those soils. And it was having a really bad detrimental effect on plant survival and success. I didn't know that, but when I discovered it, it was both very good news for the business because we were able to reduce losses on our installations and so on dramatically. So we got to keep the money when we sold a plant, which is very important to the company's bottom line. But we also had happier customers because they were happy with the outcomes. But this material was very hard to get a hold of, and as I worked my way through the sourcing and figuring out how to put these formulations together, it became apparent that it was going to be a business opportunity as well, and that's really how Root Rescue got started.
Wow, what a great transition from that career to this one.
Yeah, it is. It was kind of interesting to just simply follow it all the way down to its logical conclusion, and it was a long journey in the sense that I started this in about 2005, wrestling with the question of what's wrong with these soils and what can I do about it. And I didn't actually get the registration to sell the product from the CFIA, which you have to do if you're going to sell a plant care product, fertilizer, anything at all. You have to go through a registration process in this country. We've got a very, very diligent regulator in Ottawa. It took me 6.5 years to get this formulation through that registration process. So I didn't actually get the registration until the end of 2015.
Okay.
So that's 10 years.
Yeah.
So I would say either stubbornness or patience, you can call it what you want. It took a while to come out the other end of that journey and actually be able to open the front door and say we're open for business now.
Wow, what a journey. And go ahead, Bob.
It has given me a chance to brush up on the science. That's what I've been doing for the last long while.
And so what products does Root Rescue offer to homeowners or landscapers?
Well, it's actually fungus. Believe it or not, I'm in the fungus business.
Oh, okay.
So it turns out that one of the most important elements for normal, healthy plant growth in soils is a specialized fungi that attaches to the roots of plants and goes out into soil and works on their behalf, goes and finds water, releases nutrients, especially phosphorus, but essentially all nutrients, and delivers them back to the plant root, and thereby making the plant a lot happier, healthier, self-sufficient, drought-tolerant. This is how it works in nature up in Algonquin Park and Northern Ontario and undisturbed areas where people have not been messing around,
Mm-hmm.
nature eventually creates this stable soil ecosystem. And key to that is this relationship between the plant root and these specialized fungi called mycorrhizae. And that's the Latin name for this type of fungus,
Okay.
from two Latin words, mycor for fungus and rhizae for roots. So mycorrhizae are fungus roots. And it's this very specialized ancient fungus organism that attaches to the roots at the invitation of the plant. And I don't know how much time you have, how much you want on detail in this, but it's a symbiosis. These two organisms work together. And once the plant has mycorrhizal partnerships, it won't give them up because they become essential to its normal health and stability in the soil. So the interesting thing about my product is that it's this very concentrated powder that you mix in water, which contains millions of these specialized spores that the plant will then find, and the plant root, through a sort of a chemical signaling process, will find these spores and say, wake up, I'm ready to do business with you. You can hook up to me and I'll supply you with lunch for life. I'm going to give you extra carbon, extra sugars that I don't need, that I create through photosynthesis. He's speaking as though he's the plant now. So I've got these extra sugars because I've got this amazing trick I can do with sunlight and CO2 and water and my chlorophyll, and I've got extra sugar. I'll feed you. You go out into the soil and do this work for me. It's just a fascinating, unique relationship between plants and this specialized fungi. And that's what Root Rescue sells, believe it or not, is this fungus.
Fungus.
Yeah.
And so does it replenish itself? Like once you've added it to the soil and added it to the plant, is it continuing to, develop or?
Right. Yeah. And the answer is yes.
Okay.
It's unique in this way because once the plant has its mycorrhizal partnerships, it's found them, it hooks up to them, it lets them join on. Every fall, when the plant goes dormant, whether it's a perennial or a grass or an oak tree, or it doesn't matter what, they all have their own favorites. But when in our part of the planet we have winter, so in fall, plants go dormant, and likewise the mycorrhizal fungi get a very definite signal that the season's coming to an end, and they produce spores and leave them in the soil around the roots over the winter. And those spores are completely frost-proof. They're not harmed by frost or anything like that. The individual mycorrhizal filaments, the strands of hyphae and mycelia, don't make it through the winter. They get blown up by the frost. But the spores are very tough.
Okay.
So every spring, the spores that were made in the fall of the previous year by your mycorrhizal plant partners are there in the spring. And when the root wakes up, they get invited back to the party, and it starts all over again.
Wow.
So yes, providing you don't do anything that would harm the mycorrhizal relationship going forward, and there are a couple of things that you can do that will have a detrimental effect on this arrangement, but let's assume you don't do anything wrong.
Okay.
Then that relationship and that availability of mycorrhizae is there for life for that plant. So it's a very effective, inexpensive benefit that you can give your plants that they will enjoy permanently thereafter.
Wow. So
it's a very good deal.
Yeah, definitely.
And there, as I say, there are a couple of things that you can do by mistake that will undermine that relationship or switch it back off, and I'll be happy to share those so you can have the sort of tips and tricks of things not to do thereafter. But as long as you've got your mycorrhizae cooking, your plants will simply enjoy that partnership ongoing.
Okay. So my first question is this something that you can only apply when you first, let's say, plant the plant, or if you have an existing tree, can you still apply it?
Both are, you can do both.
Okay.
It's very important to do the initial inoculation when you plant.
Okay.
At least that's, as far as doing the right thing for the plant is concerned, that's the best.
Okay.
Because the act of planting, the act of digging soil, as landscapers and contractors, we're in there doing a lot of soil moving.
Yes.
And, it's called landscaping for a reason. We scape, we scrape, we change things.
Yeah.
And the part of soil, of living, healthy soil, that is damaged by that disruption of cultivation and change is the fungi. So just the act of digging the hole and creating a new bunch of improved soil and putting it all and packing it in there has actually broken any mycorrhizal networks that might have been there before.
Okay.
So it's critical to start off with the mycorrhizae right away. We sell the product, we call it Transplanter, Root Rescue Transplanter.
Okay.
And that name was chosen deliberately. So think of it, whenever you're doing transplanting, whenever you're disturbing the soil, putting something new in, that's the best moment to apply the product.
Okay.
But your other question was, of course, I've got a plant that's maybe not doing so well. Could this be of help? The answer is maybe. It's a possibility. If it's a plant, the one advantage of our product, well, there's probably a few. I like to think of a few. But one of the important choices we made when we formulated the product was it's delivered in water. So you literally just take a teaspoon of this powder, put it in a 2-gallon watering can, fill the watering can with water, and water the plant. Easy. And so you can do that with a plant you installed 10 minutes ago, a week ago, a month ago. It doesn't really matter. As long as you can water the roots, you can install the mycorrhizae and make them nice and cozy and close to the roots, which is the important thing. So it is very easy to use in that way. And so, I don't like to diagnose a plant malady without actually a lot of information about what might be the problem with plant X. So I don't want to make a generalization and say, oh yeah, no matter what's wrong with your plant, Root Rescue and this mycorrhizal thing is probably going to help it. I don't feel comfortable making that recommendation because I don't know if it's true or not. I need a lot more information about a particular plant to prescribe whether it would help. So I can't be sure of that. The one thing I am sure of is if you use it when you transplant, it's always useful to plants.
Okay. And if we are doing an existing plant, should we kind of, you want because you don't want to water it and have the water run off, right? You want to make sure that the water penetrates. So should you be digging like a few little holes to make sure that the Root Rescue gets to the roots? Yes,
it's a good idea to do that because some soils are very easy to wet, others are extremely difficult to wet, and you do need to poke some holes in here and there and encourage the water to go in. Go at it a couple of times. There's a kind of resistance to wetting that a lot of soils that have high peat moss in them. Peat moss is a wonderful thing, but it is very hard to get wet the first time. And if you let it dry out, it's very hard to get it wet again. And so it often takes a couple of goes to make the peat moss actually absorb water, and soils that have a high level of that same kind of organic matter can repel water. It's kind of counterintuitive. You're thinking, man, that looks dry. Why won't it take the water? But we know this is true. So often an initial little quick soaking, and then you come back half an hour later, and whoa, now it's a lot more thirsty. And you can actually get a lot more water in the second and third time than you could ever get in the first time. So, or you're right, poke some holes, make some channels so the water can get in. Obviously not doing a lot of cultivation because you're going to do more harm.
Right.
But yes, anything you can do to encourage the water to go down, revisiting the site 10 minutes later, doing it again, putting some holes in, it's all good.
Yeah. And I would think that'd be important, especially for homeowners who, might be more, apt to just kind of wave that watering can around a bit and then walk away and go, oh, yeah, well, I watered it, but,
There's clearly watering and then there's effective watering.
Right.
And they're not the same thing. I used to bemoan the fact that people would say they watered their lawn when in fact they maybe applied enough water to go in a half an inch, maybe. And they do that every day, or every night or something. It's just the wrong way to water. You want to water deeply and not very frequently.
Right.
But that's just a general rule, and that would certainly apply here because we're actually using the water to carry these tiny little spores down into the root. We're piggybacking on the water, so we want the water to go deep. We want it to go in the top 30 centimeters, 45 centimeters of soil because that's where the active root zone is. So when you're planting something, that's easy to do.
Yes.
Because you can literally water as you backfill and make sure everything's nice and wet.
Okay.
But you're right. It can be fun to get water in deep after the fact. No question.
Now, I'm also thinking that one of the questions our listeners might have is how is this different to a fertilizer?
Well, it's actually completely different.
Yes.
In the sense that when you get our package and you look at it, there's a guaranteed analysis on there, which is that thing that took me a long time to get through CFIA, the registration. And usually a guaranteed analysis on something you buy at a garden center would say 3 numbers, like, 10, 52, 10, or something like that, NPK,
or
fertilizer values.
Mm-hmm.
Our guaranteed analysis, what we guarantee is in the package and what the regulators certify is in the package, none of what you see there is a fertilizer. It's entirely these organisms. So, and a couple of really good biostimulants too, but those also are not fertilizers. So what this thing is, it's a different way of thinking, and it's all about creating a situation where the plant is much more self-sufficient. So what if I said to you, it's kind of like, this guy's starving, do we give him a fish or do we show him how to fish? It's very much the same.
Okay.
And I would say, let's show him how to fish. Let him take care of himself. This is actually a much better thing for everybody. And when you give plants these organisms, these fungi, think about the long evolution that plants have had on this planet. Way, way longer than you and I or our relatives have been here, or anything that even looked like a human being. They've had a long time, millions of years, to create these relationships with these microbes in soil. They're used to them being there from an evolutionary point of view. And when they're not there, plants really struggle, and they become very dependent on us to water and to fertilize. Guess what? We water and we fertilize. Well, what if you gave them back their old, ancient mycorrhizal and bacterial partnerships that they had for all of that time before we came along? They become suddenly much more self-sufficient and need a whole lot less inputs. In fact, the way it works with plants you do the mycorrhizae with, I said there were a couple of things you don't want to do after you've done this. And one of the things you don't want to do is actually apply a lot of synthetic fertilizers, because they have a funny effect on plants. It's like a drug, sort of.
Really?
And yeah, it's very interesting. I'm sorry, I don't mean to take too much time on science stuff.
No,
here,
but I think it helps explain it. So, because
yeah,
that's going to be the thing that people want to understand. They're more familiar with fertilizing, and we're always talking about those 3 numbers and things
NPK,
like that.
Absolutely.
So,
well,
yeah.
To stick to the really important bit about this part of the story, the middle number, the P, the phosphorus, is the tricky business where mycorrhizae is concerned, where this very, very valuable fungus is concerned. One of its major roles to a plant is to get water from the soil that the plant can't otherwise find. Because it does this because it has these tiny, tiny little mycelial webs that are just a fraction of the diameter of a root. So it can get into these nooks and crannies and find all kinds of stuff in soil that roots are just too big and clunky to find. So water, which is what we noticed when we had the product tested by the University of Guelph for 4 years. They looked at plants that were treated and plants that weren't, and these were just literally 3 meters apart. This tree is finding all the water it needs, and this one over here, both planted just 2 weeks before, is struggling to find water. And this science, you have to repeat it over and over again, or you don't consider it a valid finding. And they tested 2,900 trees over the course of 4 years, and this actually works. So besides finding water, the other thing that mycorrhizae do, the other thing that this fungus does that is extremely important to plants, is it finds phosphorus in soil. Phosphorus is a funny plant nutrient. It's very important. It's important for us. I mean, we got teeth and bones, and every cell in our body's got phosphorus in it because we need it to function normally. We get it by eating plants or animals that have eaten it themselves. But where the fungus is concerned, it is able to get phosphorus out of soil, and roots can't do it on their own literally at all in nature. They hire mycorrhizal fungi to do this work because mycorrhizae, this specialized fungus, exudes an acid, a phosphatase enzyme, that dissolves the mineral phosphorus that's attached to the clay and the sand and the gravel and the rocks in your soil. And it's inaccessible directly. It's not plant available until the mycorrhizae makes it plant available. It literally sneaks up on the calcium phosphate crystal that's stuck to the clay and exudes its little specialized acids, dissolves that calcium phosphate crystal, turns it into a plant available form of phosphorus, P2O5, and brings it back to the plant. So that is an amazing trick, and it is a specialization of mycorrhizae. So here's the point. If you apply a high-value phosphorus fertilizer. I don't want to name any brands, but the kind that you take a tablespoon of and mix it in a watering can, and it's got usually pretty high numbers on the bag. Those numbers are so high that the plant actually goes into a kind of stupor. It's called lazy root syndrome.
Ooh.
And what happens is the plant says, wait a minute, I've got all the phosphorus especially that I could ever need. I'm really just literally swimming in it here. So I'm not going to feed my mycorrhizae anymore to go get phosphorus. I don't need you guys anymore. Looks like I've got a whole new system going here. And so it stops giving its sugars to the mycorrhizae to go and do the work it would normally do for the plant, and the mycorrhizae fades away. So that's the thing you shouldn't do, is if you've used the mycorrhizae, if you're deciding to grow organically, naturally, this is a foundational piece of doing that. Once you've got your mycorrhizae cooking, you don't want to switch it off. And so avoid the high-value synthetic fertilizers, the ones with the very big numbers, because they will actually switch off the mycorrhizae that you've just gotten started. So, what's the right fertilizer to use? Funnily enough, the organic fertilizers are the ones to use because their numbers are much lower. You look at a bag of a granular organic fertilizer, and it kind of looks like it's not, in fact, some would say not very good value. You look at the synthetic one over here, and it's got these big numbers, 20, 18, 5 or something. And then you look at the organic fertilizer, and it's saying 3, 5, 2. That doesn't sound like a very good value, but the truth is it's a perfect amount of fertility for a plant that is growing with its living microbial partnerships intact.
Wow.
It doesn't have a negative effect on the relationship, and in fact, a very high percentage of those nutrients will end up in the plant. The thing that is not really appreciated is that the synthetic fertilizers, although their numbers are really high, very little of the fertilizer applied actually ends up in the plant. The material is so volatile, so easily carried away in water or turns back into gas, that a very low percentage of those synthetic fertilizers actually end up in the plant. And whereas the organics, because they work with the microbial elements in soil, the bacteria and the fungi, virtually all of it ends up in the plant. Nothing is wasted.
Wow.
So those low numbers actually end up being a perfect fit for fertilizing your plants. So it's kind of an easy switch to remember in the sense that if you start your plants off on planting day with mycorrhizae, with root rescue, or another mycorrhizal product indeed, just stick to organic stuff going forward and you won't go wrong.
Okay.
That's all there is to it. So it's a pretty simple rule to follow, and you just won't make any mistakes if you do that.
Wow. So Matthew and I are both in a bit of a stupor because it really goes a bit against everything we learned in school, right?
Yeah, I know that.
But it does make sense.
In that regard, because the synthetic school of how to grow plants has been holding court for long years now. Let's say since the Second World War, when that chemistry became available because they weren't making bombs anymore, they simply started making fertilizer instead, and all of a sudden it was everywhere.
Yeah.
And everybody that went to agricultural college or whatever learned this new way of growing plants involved these high-value fertilizers.
Yeah.
They've had their way for a long time. And the fact is they work. I'm not going to say they don't. I'd be crazy to say they don't. But there's a price that's paid in the soil by using those high-value synthetic fertilizers over and over and over again. And it's not healthy. What happens is the organic matter is depleted, the microbial life goes away in soils. You create a kind of dependency on the continued application of the fertilizer because all the friendly natural microbial partnerships that plants used to have get switched off.
Yeah.
And so you end up having to apply these things in just way too high a dose over and over again to get the same results that you want to see on your plants. And it's not the natural way that it should work.
Right. And it's obviously not working, like you said, with the high rate of returns or the plants that are not making it through their first season.
Yeah.
Then there's something to be said for the fact that the not to say that all of those plants were fertilized to begin with, but
No.
this is definitely a step in the right direction for your average homeowner.
Yeah, the increased survival rates had everything to do with the fact that the root systems were finding these microbial partners that they had, and they would engage them right away. Within 2 or 3 days, this equation is starting to function. And the plant is now able to find water that it otherwise wouldn't be able to find on its own. And that, more than anything else, in that first few months after planting, is going to be the problem area. It's going to be why the plant failed. It was unable to find the 6 or 7 liters of water it needs today to be a happy plant. It could only get 3,
Right.
and it'll start to fail, and it'll start to fade and become stressed. And so the mycorrhizae, because they're able to find this extra water in soil right away and continue finding it, the stress levels for the plant materials just drop. And that's why it's such an effective transplanter. It's such an effective product in preventing transplant shock, because these microbial partners are just working really hard to give the plant what it needs to be happy on this new planting site. So that's why our losses just went boom, fell away nicely, because the plants were not struggling to be happy on this site. After all, at the garden center, you're taking care of these plants. You're giving them everything they need. You're watering them, maybe every day. You're babying them. You're taking care of them. You make sure they have no weeds, and they're absolutely wonderful. And then they go through this transition into the garden, into the ground, and it is a major shock to the plant. It's a total reset of what it's used to. And this product, the mycorrhizal partnerships, this fungi, is like a welcome mat to these plants that are going through this transition. And the plants just lock right in. I remember I was the guy more often than not that would be at our, what we call the information booth at the garden center, which is where all these things would come back, all the dead things, the March of the Dead. And what was really annoying to me was you'd see this emerald cedar or this plant or whatever it was coming back 6 months after the customer had bought it that fall or something, and after a spring purchase, and the root ball unchanged from the day it left the garden center.
Yep.
No evidence that it had engaged the soil on the planting site. It just stunted. It just sat there. And I said, did you water it? Yeah, I did. Did you? How often? Did you? Everything, of course, was done right.
Yes.
But and honestly, the customers typically didn't do anything wrong. But these plants just found no real incentive to grow into these soils.
Wow.
They found nothing that was going to be of value to them, to help them engage this new, different ecosystem that they found themselves in. And a silly percentage of them just didn't make it. And it was that lack of enthusiasm for the soil where it found itself was the real culprit. Like, they just wouldn't engage the soil because it was lifeless in the end. And putting this very important element of the mycorrhizal fungi into the soil just made a tremendous difference. It just lays out the welcome mat for plants.
Wow, that is great. I mean, I can both realize that both of us realize that plants that come back, have not changed, or even in our own gardens.
It's like they were petrified.
We do have a funny a listener who's written in with a humorous question for you, Bob. He said there is a product called Root Rescue for hair coloring by L'Oreal.
Yes.
And do folks ever contact you by mistake asking about the hair rescue product?
It's funny. I actually trademarked the name Root Rescue in 2006.
Oh, okay.
When I decided to make a business of this, and I didn't know it would take me as long as it took me to get to the market. But I trademarked it in Canada and the U.S. then, which is before L'Oreal trademarked it. It trademarked Root Rescue, the hair color. So my trademark lawyer said, I called him up and I said, can they do this? Can this company actually call their product Root Rescue? We were there first. And in the end, he said, yeah, of course they can, because trademark doesn't work that way. It's a different class of merchandise.
Okay.
The market says nobody's going to confuse a hair color product with a product that helps plant roots. so L'Oreal with I thought that would be a fun battle to have between little old me and the giant corporation over the name Root Rescue. But So there's that little story.
Yeah, for sure. And when I Googled it too, it did come up in the search. So that's
Yes,
good.
it's
So
the first one. Well, they've got more cash than I do to make sure they come up on
that's
Google
right.
first. So absolutely. But if you go on Amazon and ask for root rescue, you'll find my thing. So that's good.
There you go.
That's
There you go.
better.
I did want to ask a question. So, when the homeowner digs a hole in their normal garden,
Yes.
and that's lacking, in your typical subdivision, I get that it's lacking with the fungi. Now, what about when we're bringing in, let's say, the triple mix and the new soil? Would there be more of that present there, or is it because that has then also been disturbed or bagged and trucked?
It's an interesting question, and it's a really good one, and my answer is maybe going to be counterintuitive, but let me go on this one for a second here. First of all, how did that soil that you brought to the site get made? Probably a large portion of it was made in the composting process. At least I hope it was, because compost is an amazingly valuable thing. Municipal sites do composting, and it's all good. I have nothing but good things to say about composting. But the way it's done, composting temperatures get up to about 60 or 65 degrees Celsius when it's really cooking. You can't even put your hand into a compost pile, or it'll get scorched when it's really going. And that's a good thing, because that heat breaks down the pathogens, and the weed seeds get killed off and everything else. It's part of the benefits of the composting process. But at the same time, it also cooks fungi, all fungi, irrespective of good or bad. So it's kind of like taking an antibiotic, and you're killing the good bugs and the bad bugs in our own digestive tract. Same problem. So the other thing is that mycorrhizae, so they may have been there in the initial ingredients of the composting materials, but they get cooked in the process of composting. So that's one thing. The other thing is that a lot of these materials are piled and stored for a long time before they're actually sold to you or me. And the truth of mycorrhizae is that it only exists in soil, and it only exists as a fungus if it's working with a living plant root host. So there aren't any plant root hosts on the compost pile, if you follow, or the storage. So unlike other fungi, which can find lunch a different way, saprophytic fungi can digest dead things. Obviously pathogenic fungi just take what they want. They don't care. They'll kill off their host. They don't care at all. They just move on to the next guy. But mycorrhizae only gets its lunch by working for a plant root. So if there is no plant host root there to work with, there's no mycorrhizae. So the soil that we bring to the sites is good stuff. I mean, compared to the crap that you can have on a site where you takes a pickaxe to dig a hole, you're dealing with a native site or a soil that needs to be helped, no question. And so we want to bring in organic matter. We want to bring in soil that will actually take water and absorb water, and it feels good. And you can imagine roots being successful in this new stuff we've brought. So and there's a lot to be said for that, and that's all true. But what is absent is the mycorrhizae. So it's not there. And that's the reason why it should be applied with the planting that you do.
Excellent. That totally makes sense. No, but that's good. That really made sense, didn't it, Matthew? Yeah.
So that's the thinking there. And so I can't say enough good things about compost and enough good things about peat moss and all these other things, given the fact that they're so needed in these high-density clay soils, or indeed in sandy soils, because what's going to hold moisture? Nothing. So you got to put those things in. And, a high percentage of it should be that. But that doesn't mean that you've also installed the mycorrhizal fungi.
Okay. And what about, we like to do a lot of, the garden centers, a lot of fall sales, get rid of the plants. Can you apply root rescue in the fall and still have it effective? Like, will it establish quick enough and then go to sleep and the spores be present for spring?
You guys are asking really good questions. Fantastic. So the answer is all about, timing. So soil temperatures are a little slower to change than air temperatures.
Right.
So we find that as long as soil temperatures remain above 8 degrees Celsius or so, roots are still active.
Okay.
So you can install a plant in October, late October, early November. Its leaves may already be upsizing, but it may root in. And its active growing roots where mycorrhizae will make a connection. So let's say it's October 1st, and you've got some bargain plants at the garden center, and go home and install them, and you use root rescue. There's a pretty high percentage of those plant roots will actually still be functioning when they hit the planting site, and the mycorrhizae will germinate and attach to the root, albeit briefly, and then they're going to produce their spore phase, and everybody goes for the big nap. But even if they don't, even if the roots, in fact, are fully dormant, and you put the plant in the ground, you install everything as you should, you mulch, and you water it all in with the transplanter, those spores will just lay there waiting for spring, just as though they would in every other situation in nature. Because as I mentioned, it's not the hyphae or the mycelial webs that survive. The roots do. We know that plant roots, at least not annuals, but the perennials and the woody ornamentals and so on, their roots actually will survive freezing and thawing and everything else.
Right.
But the mycorrhizal hyphae, the spongy filaments that do the work, don't. They get blown to bits by frost. Only the spores survive. So if all you do is install the spores in the fall, when you put your plants in, they'll still be there in the spring. And it will start working in the spring as per normal.
So the fungus is almost like an annual in the soil.
It is.
Yeah, the network
That's the funny
obliterates.
thing. And there's so many things to say about this, and it's going to get silly boring after a while. But
Nope, I love every word of it.
Yeah.
There's many kinds of mycorrhizal fungi. As you can imagine, nature doesn't really like monoculture.
Yeah.
We know this about nature above grade, and it's certainly true about nature below grade. To just pick a particular plant, let's just pick a tomato. A tomato is a plant that likes mycorrhizae. It likes a particular type of mycorrhizae. It's called endomycorrhizae. And that's a name that I won't go into the details, but it's a particular type. And there are many species of endomycorrhizae, maybe 60 or 80 or 100 species of it in Canadian soils, growing attached to tomato plants and grass plants and maple trees. And every plant among that group of species will prefer certain ones over others. And so in nature, when a plant wakes up in the spring, it finds at its feet a whole bunch of different kinds of mycorrhizal spores from the year before. Some it will use. Some it has no use for at all. For instance, the mycorrhizal spores and the mycorrhizal organisms that conifers use, pine, spruce, fir, and indeed hardwood trees like oak and beech and birch, are completely different than the ones that the tomato plant or the corn plant or the hosta or the grass plant use. Completely different.
Yeah.
So there may be all kinds of endomycorrhizal spores at the foot of a birch tree, millions of them laying there from the previous year. Maybe they got there because the grass was using them nearby or something like that. But the birch tree won't use any of them. It uses ectomycorrhizal spores. And so nature's all mixed up, and there's all these different things going on. And the interesting thing is that the plants always choose. They're the ones that actually use a biochemical signaling system to set up who it is they're going to use this year.
Wow.
And if you watch trees or long-lived plants over the course of their long lives, they actually change the partners that they use. As a young plant, a certain tree or shrub will use these ones. And then as it gets older or into middle age, it stops using those ones and it uses these ones. And so over time, it actually changes its mycorrhizal partnerships. Because after all, if it's true that it all sort of starts again every spring, then a plant will decide what it needs that year versus the year before.
Yeah. And so many factors, right? Weather, water, yeah.
Well, that's right. And climate change. Nature's used to climate change. It's used to drought years and wet years. Lots of practice with this over the last few million years. So depending on what I am as a mycorrhizal organism, I may be employed very much by plants in situation X, but then I'm not as popular in situation Y. And that's just the way it goes. The plants decide. They know what they need, and they know what the individual organisms can provide for them. And as things change, they have the power to change and to reshuffle the deck and to use a whole different group of actors if they need to. So in that way, it's important, getting back to the product and how we work with this product and these spores as gardeners or landscapers, is you want to make sure that if you're putting in a particular kind of plant, like again a pine tree or a spruce or a fir or a hardwood tree, that you want to apply a product that contains the ectomycorrhizal spores that those plants need, because they have no use for the other kind.
Okay.
So it's the reason why our product has 18 different species of mycorrhizae in it,
Okay.
not just one or two or three, but 18, so that no matter what you're planting, the product will provide the right type of mycorrhizae for the plant.
Okay, so let's highlight that. So it's not like people have to go out and choose from 18 different varieties of something that you sell.
We don't use that method.
Right. So you have everything that any plant, even vegetables.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I can tell you the exceptions, and there are some funny exceptions, but they're not just exceptions for my product. There are certain plants that aren't. They're called non-mycorrhizal. They just don't use mycorrhizae at all. They've evolved to find a different way to deal with life stresses, or I'm not sure.
Right.
But and examples of this include the Brassica family. So, for instance, cabbages and Brussels sprouts, which I don't like anyway, don't use mycorrhizae at all.
Okay.
They have no use for any kind. So another example where our product, even though it has 18 different kinds of mycorrhizae in it, doesn't work at all, is rhododendrons and azaleas and other ericaceous plants have a very, very specialized mycorrhizae called ericoid mycorrhizae, and we don't have any of that in our product either.
Okay.
So Root Rescue Transplanter won't work or doesn't have the right kind of mycorrhizae for rhododendrons, azaleas, or blueberries either.
Okay.
So there are exceptions.
Yeah.
But there are very few.
Yeah, if that's it, that's there's
well,
a whole lot of
there's
other
a couple
plants.
Of other weird ones. I
Yeah.
love this one, and it drives me crazy. It's in the perennials. Sedum.
Oh,
Sedum is non-mycorrhizal. Now,
really?
I don't know why. Maybe
Okay.
because it's got all those fleshy leaves, and
Yeah.
it's figured a different strategy
Yeah.
for surviving hard times. It just sort of fills its leaves with stuff, and if things get bad, it just
Yeah.
shrinks them up. Either way, sedum is non-mycorrhizal. The reason that drives me a little nutty is that we're getting a lot of inquiry and a lot of interest in this product for a green roof. Because when you think about a green roof environment, you're looking at a very small amount of media up there.
Right.
And you think stresses are bad on the ground.
Mhm.
They're way more stressful
Yeah.
up on a roof of a building when you've only got 10 centimeters of media. So sedum have become a very popular go-to system for green roof. You buy them in mats, and you can assemble this whole thing in record time, and they're relatively inexpensive. Great, but they're non-mycorrhizal, so I can't reduce the stress of those plants on the
Oh,
roof
that's
by
too bad.
applying by
Yeah.
recommending the use of our product. It just won't work because
Okay.
sedum don't use mycorrhizae.
Okay.
So, but in green roof situations and live roof designs where there's a newer building and it'll take more weight, and so we can have 4 inches of media to work with or something. That's when the designers get to have more fun, and they
Okay.
get to create interesting gardens
Yeah.
on roofs with herbs and grasses and dwarf conifers and stuff. And that's when my product works, because it works with everything else. So there's that.
Excellent. Excellent. So why don't we talk about where our listeners could find your products?
Well, it's available in about 150 garden centers across Canada and counting.
Okay.
As of now, this is our third spring only since we've been in the market, so we're working on it every day. And you can go to our website and look at the list of garden centers that carry the product. I've got to update that list, by the way.
Okay. Excellent.
But if it's out of your way, then you can also simply go to Amazon and buy it.
Oh.
Just go to Amazon.com and type in Root Rescue, and boom, it's right there.
Okay.
And so there's that. That's pretty easy. Everybody has gotten into online shopping, and 2 days later, it's on your doorstep.
Which is very nice. I quite enjoy it. But what about your website? You mentioned your website, so just for listeners who might want to jump there. Rootrescue.com. Okay, perfect.
And you're pretty active on social media.
Yeah, I've got the Root Rescue Nature, Natur, is my Twitter handle.
Okay.
And at Root Rescue Nature. And I think those are the ones I use a lot. There's a Facebook page for the Root Rescue business as well, called Root Rescue.
Okay.
So yeah, there's all those various platforms. I do fairly regular postings, especially on Twitter. I like to cycle through the latest science that comes to me and put it out there There's a lot of research being done in soil health these days.
Yeah.
It's just really picking up speed,
Yeah.
which is really gratifying because this is going to be really important for carbon sequestration in soils and putting the life back into soils. Has that amazing additional benefit of capturing carbon. I mean, after all, what's mycorrhizae made of? It's made of substances that are given to the plant through photosynthesis, given by the plant host to it through photosynthesis. So the CO2 that the plant takes out of the air to make its sugars end up in the ground, building these mycorrhizal networks. It is a very important carbon sequestration system, in addition to all the good things it does. So all of these healthy soils, as opposed to the ones that aren't healthy, are a lot healthier for everything in that regard.
Yeah.
It's that's a very deep subject, again, like most of these, but there's no downside to this. It's all good.
Yes, yeah. And I think with the focus more on, especially with the bees and the butterflies, and that people really wanting to know what they're putting their plants on their plants, and so I think this just ties into that. You're right. If you start organic, you have to stay organic.
You really do. You've just made it. Yeah. You've just turned a corner. Just stay on track.
Exactly.
The good news is, there's our product, but there's so many other new, excellent organic products on the market now that weren't here 10 and 15 years ago, not even 5 years ago. And there's just a whole lot of new tools in the toolbox these days, bacterial inoculants that improve the nitrogen fixing capability of soils, which is far better than using ammonium nitrate to do it, because ammonium nitrate's effect is so fleeting. Much of what you apply just disappears as a gas or leaches into your pond and makes your pond turn green. It's just a smarter way to grow plants, and there's just a lot more cool tools out there these days than there ever were.
Yeah, well, that is great, and more to learn, and I think that's great that you can communicate and share with people on Twitter, and if anybody has questions, that's a good place to find you to kind of ask some more questions. One quick question is, because we're in Canada, but we do have listeners in the U.S. Right now, Root Rescue is only available in Ontario or in Canada?
It's available all across Canada, and yes, the regulatory systems of both Canada and the U.S. don't like seeing this stuff cross the border.
Right.
So no, we don't offer it in U.S. Locations at this time.
At this time,
there are. It's the U.S. There are a lot more products on offer in the U.S. than in Canada. Generally, you will find something similar to our product, and if you go to our website, you can look at the label, look at the packaging, know what you're looking for. You will find something close to it in the U.S. It is a unique formulation, but it has cousins, let me put it that way, that you would be able to find in the U.S. market.
Okay, so we as to wrap up, because oh my goodness, time just flew with us, Bob. Thank you so much.
Talking like a crazy man. You get me going, you won't stop me.
No, well,
I do apologize. For that.
No, we really appreciate it. So Matthew and I started a new segment since we were both landscape designers, and we're constantly, want to share and teach and educate our listeners. But we always want to we started wanting to throw a bit of a design element. So based on your history, do you have a like your favorite tree or your favorite, a favorite design element or a favorite plant that should be?
Well, I'm going to be kind of reductive here and make a generalization.
Okay.
We need to plant a lot more natives.
Okay.
And I won't be the first guy to say this.
Right.
But maybe I'm going to take a slightly different angle on it, and it goes like this: the native shrubs, and if you need a list, just go anywhere and ask what are the native shrubs to a given. It's easy to find. The reason they're so important, it's kind of counterintuitive, but they support the native insect and wildlife populations too, which is really important. So I think we all like butterflies. I think we all like birds, songbirds. And the thing that's underappreciated is that songbirds and birds in general eat a lot of things, but the most important part of a bird diet is insects. And if you've got a landscape that is made of plants from Asia or from Europe or from somewhere other than here, the insect populations don't recognize that plant, which sounds kind of good, right, in a sense. If you're really worried about bugs, you're thinking, well, give me a plant that never has bugs. Well, that's great, but if there are no insects, if there are no caterpillars that like the leaves of that plant at all, or there are no other insects that do, that means there's no birds able to be fed either. And I think that that's crazy. You know, we really need to bring all of nature back and to support it. And the best way to do that is to plant and use more natives. So in shrubs, you know, use redbud. Arrowwood viburnum's one of my favorites.
Okay.
So many cool things.
Yeah.
It's beautiful as well as being native. So, and you'll notice some caterpillars on arrowwood viburnum, but you'll also notice birds eating them. And that's great because, yes, they do produce a berry in the fall, and that's a brief little bonus for birds. But it is the most important thing is to have these native stands and you know, have a red oak instead of a Chanticleer pear or something like that. On a Chanticleer pear, you're going to have no insect life, no bird life, no nothing. Plant a red oak, and I think it supports 80 different species.
Yeah,
of
I've heard that too. Yeah,
all of which make it a buffet for birds all summer long. And so that's my speech on that.
Okay.
So just consider more natives.
Excellent.
And just because it's the right thing to do.
Okay.
They support more than you would imagine as far as supporting the ecology is concerned, and it's just a good idea. Have wild spaces in your garden is my other thing. The idea of raking up every leaf and being fastidious about cleaning the whole place is something I think we need to get away from.
Yeah.
We need to leave some wild spaces. I think the statistic is that landscape design or landscapes in cities and towns is 90% turf.
Yeah, that's a whole other show, though.
That's a whole other show.
Yeah.
But just make more gardens.
Make more garden. Excellent.
Make more gardens. You don't have to mow them.
Yeah.
In fact, you don't even have to do anything to them if you install the right plants and put in enough mulch and so on, and just let them be wild. You know, not your whole yard. Yeah. But just a few percentages more.
Excellent.
And that's my generalization.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Bob. Thank you for joining us and telling us all about Root Rescue. Well, we really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Okay. We'll talk soon. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Bob.
Bye-bye.
So there you have it. We learned a lot, didn't we?
I absolutely loved everything that Bob had to say.
Yes, you're geeking out there on the science.
Totally geeking out. I love the science. And I think we shared a lot of sentiments and approaches as far as garden center stuff. So I loved it. Thank you, Bob, for coming on the show. And we are out of time.
Pretty much out of time. We want our listeners to know that they can, the show will be up as a podcast in the next few days. Yep. So please pay attention to us on our social media, Joanne Shaw _D2E on Twitter and Instagram, as well as Down to Earth on Facebook. And Matt?
Yep, and I'm at naturalaffinitydesigns.ca and at Nat Affinity on Twitter and Natural Affinity Designs on Instagram as well.
And we are on Apple Podcasts, so you can go on there. And the cool thing would be to subscribe to our show because then as soon as it's loaded up, you'll get notified that the new show is available. So Down the Garden Path on your favorite podcast app. And we want to thank everybody for listening. We've got some great shows coming up in the next few weeks.
We do.
But we're going to say goodbye and thank everybody for joining us down the garden path here on Reality Radio 101. Matthew has one thing to add.
I just want to say Happy Valentine's Day, everyone, because we won't see you until afterwards.
That's right. Happy Valentine's Day from all of us here at Reality Radio 101.
Thank you for listening to Down the Garden Path with your hosts, Joanne Shaw and Matthew Dressing, right here on Reality Radio 101.